Howdy, folks. Happy Monday. We are back. We have some stuff to talk about, including the upcoming series. We don't know when it's going to start, but the upcoming series between the Columbus Blue Jackets and the Toronto Maple Leafs. We're going to start off with some pre-show stuff, a little baseball, and a little Bruce Lee. Russ, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just talking about it. I've always been a big fan. Matter of fact, I want to say 3, 4, 5 years ago, I bought another Bruce Lee shirt. I had one growing up at like a Comic-Con. I grew up at the right time, right? Like he just started to get popular in the United States. I was watching Green Hornet. Matter of fact, there's a Heroes and Something channel that has just gone online in the last year. And so my DVR is full of Green Hornets, but I think I finally watched all of them again from the first season. But the big thing with Bruce Lee was he also was an instrument of change, because he, in his own career, I didn't realize that they had signed a deal with him to basically keep him for 18 months to find work for him, because they knew he was going to be a star, and all they came up with was Green Hornet. And when that was over, all he was doing was getting bit parts. So considering where he was in the world, that is something where I imagine it was frustrating. We saw and we heard about it. The one thing we didn't hear about was Chuck Norris. And I think the reason we didn't hear about Chuck Norris was because at that time, Chuck Norris had won all the karate championships in the world and was the #1 guy in the world. But Bruce Lee dropped out of that line of work. Like, it's not really a line of work. He just dropped out of those competitions because he didn't believe in them anymore. He did great in those competitions, but he also came up with his own methods mixed in with 3 or 4 different types. So someone like Chuck Norris can say, yes, I'm the best in the world because he stayed on that course. Bruce Lee didn't. But apparently on Enter the Dragon, when they were filming that movie, there was a time, and I'll say allegedly, because, you always have to these days, but it was written about that Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris, after a scene, after much deliberating, and I guess the producers not wanting this to happen, walked behind a building, and people heard a commotion. They don't know what went on, and Bruce Lee walked around the building, and he was smiling, and Chuck Norris didn't come out right away. And so they figured they did spar, and it was a pretty quick win by Bruce Lee. And at the end of the day, at that time in the world, like let's say 73, 74, he was the best athlete in the world. Like he was. Just wasn't in something where you could measure it. But if he were in UFC, he would beat someone like Conor McGregor in about 12 seconds because he knew how to use his body, the leverage, all that. He studied all of that. And you know what? Everybody who's, crazy smart like that and really good always has a good and bad side. And we heard about both. That was good. I did want to hear more about his death, though, because it was very unusual, and they really glossed over it. But you did point out why, probably.
Yeah, I get the feeling, Jan, it was sort of like The Last Dance. If you're going to get the family of Bruce Lee, and it was his brother, his widow, his daughter, all participating in the narration. And I actually like that. I mean, in some documentaries, I don't like it where, like, I don't know if you ever saw the Eric Clapton documentary that was on Showtime called Life in 12 Bars, but they had the people who you wanted to see on camera just doing voiceovers. And I thought it sort of took away from it. Here, it's like at the end, I thought they poignantly showed everybody, but they really did gloss over the death and all the rumors, all the speculation. I guess they didn't want to go down that sort of mystical road or whatever, or even
mystical. It's funny. It's like all they said was this woman gave him a pill, an analgesic. She let him sleep, and then he never woke up. And they assumed that he had edema and died. Right. Now, he was having migraines. That was the one thing that was being reported. So clearly there was something going on in his brain. But again, I've used analgesics my whole life for various ailments, not swallowing them, but on my body, and nothing bad has ever happened to me. So I do think it does leave too much to interpretation, and no mention of Brandon, which they showed him in interviews when they were running the credits, but they really should have talked about the fact that he was following in his father's footsteps, since they showed him as a kid and then died of mysterious circumstances too.
And I have
the movie set.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, not mysterious. Seems like he was shot, basically.
No. But you know what the mysterious part is, Jan? The caliber of bullet was different than what was being loaded as far as the blank. So that's the mysterious part. Why?
So, I mean, I haven't seen 30 for 30 yet. I have a DVR. I was out last night. So, I mean, it's one of those I did record because I did want to watch it. And big Bruce Lee fan as a kid. I mean, especially he's talked about, Green Lantern became bigger after, well after he passed away. Kind of got a second life to a certain extent, right? But clearly, if you watch Enter the Dragon and just the 1-inch punch, just the amazing speed he had on his hands. Just from watching the beginning part, you saw kind of when he was doing, just showing a couple things. That probably wasn't even full speed. You can just see the amazing speed he had with his hands and his feet.
Yeah, I wonder if Seagal could have taken him.
Steven Seagal was too fat and too out of shape.
Well, not in his first movies. But above the law, he was in good
Mark
shape.
for Death also. He had the 3-letter words, which you knew was a Seagal movie.
Seagal was good in his own right, but those kinds of guys, were the kinds of guys that would train with Bruce Lee, but they weren't like in his genre. They weren't as good as him. You saw that even guys like Steve McQueen were training with him, and Steve McQueen was a stuntman, I think, before he was an actor, and I think he did some of that. But anyhow, it really is. It's fun to watch. It's a little sad at times, but it's interesting to see how the world was and how he came about. And honestly, it's a shame that he died a few days before Enter the Dragon and really didn't get to experience all that success that he really desperately wanted to. He got a lot of it in Tokyo, but he never really experienced it in the U.S. That's a bit of a shame.
Just a quick note here. It's like, I remember when I worked at the movie theater, there was a biopic of Bruce Lee called Dragon, the Bruce Lee story. Yeah. And it wasn't a bad movie. Of course, with every biopic, that there's going to be some fast and loose with the truth type of thing.
Yes.
But you would think that they would get like the look of the person who's a major part of the story correct or close to being correct. And if you look at the widow of Bruce Lee, an attractive lady, I think Linda Lee Cadwell is her name now. She looks absolutely nothing like Lauren Holly, who played Bruce Lee's wife in the movie. It's like I'm struck by. It's like, okay, couldn't you get an actress who looked like the character?
Yeah, it's weird why they didn't do that. Or, in this day and age, it wasn't that long ago. They should have done it. The one thing that I don't know how it was. Well, you're younger than me, but in our neighborhood, when all the Bruce Lee stuff hit, so did nunchucks. And nunchucks were prevalent in our area until they got outlawed. But Mick Kern pointed out to me on Sirius, and once in a while I remember these things. Jan may remember them, but they were called clackers, and they were like mini like porcelain balls on a string, and they would clack together like nunchucks. They got outlawed in school too because kids were breaking their fingers on them.
Yeah, no. Some kid had nunchucks in grammar school, but they were like hollow plastic. They still hurt though. When the guy was whipping around and he hits you, it's like getting hit with a Milek hockey ball or
we all got the feeling of doing it, and then the first time you hit yourself in the jewels, you stop. We all did it. It all happened.
It's like Kerbangers years ago. The same thing, right? You have the thing with like this, and after a while, you go too fast and hit yourself. And
you know what's going to happen? Like it's inevitable.
Switching to baseball quickly here.
Which is another shot in the jewels, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. It does sound, and I can't remember whether it was Jeff Passan or Ken Rosenthal that said over the weekend that July 4th is pretty much dead. Even though they said the deadline for that was June the 10th, it doesn't seem like anything is going to get straightened out in the next 48 hours. So I know that there was a counter proposal that Carl Ravitch from ESPN had put out there where, again, the owners are going back to, we'll play 82 games, but it's 70% prorated of your pay. The players, I think the players would agree more to playing a shorter schedule at 100% prorated than 75% prorated for a longer schedule. That's just my guess, but I really think that the players are looking bad here. The owners are looking bad too, but the players are looking worse.
The owners are not looking particularly good with this. This proposal is not great, right? Part of it is based upon getting a percentage now, but more so for the playoffs, right? But you take the risk of the playoffs not happening. The other piece I heard is that just came out recently from, I think, either Sherman, Passan, all of them been tweeting 16-team playoffs now. So you'd have an increased playoff revenue. That's another thing. Oh, and by the way, you need to sign a waiver to play.
Yeah. Right. That is a big thing.
you're not going to basically blame. You're not going to take anything out on the team. So that one's going to look like it'd be a no starter.
You know what's going to happen here, Jan. If they don't get that waiver, the first thing that's going to happen is the first guy who gets coronavirus is going to sue Major League Baseball.
But Mike, the problem
every small
is
business in the country is getting waivers for these situations.
Actually, I don't believe anybody in the NHL is. The problem is this: they don't know what the workplace is going to be. And until you get there, you don't know how your employer is handling the workplace. What if you've signed this waiver and they have made you exposed to like 15 different services that you didn't count on, and now you can't get out of it, or you won't get paid, and you may get blacklisted in your sport? You're not signing on for that in advance.
You can get out of it. You file a grievance. That's part of the CBA.
Okay, Mike.
No, but I'm serious. It's
come on. You know better than that.
Because clearly Rob Manfred has built a level of trust so far with the players that you think you're going to get a fair shake.
I will grant that, Jan. But what I'm saying is, right now the owners are holding to the players to that agreement that was collectively bargained in March, and the players are balking. Now, I don't know if anybody's threatening.
They're trying to renegotiate off that, Mike. Also, don't forget the percentages are going to be different. They're trying to take another haircut off of what was negotiated originally. That's the sticking point.
Right. Well, if they try to get a percentage of prorated money, I get that. Then that is basically thrown out. But if they're going to give you 100% of prorated money, but we're only going to play 50 games because we can, that's the only thing we can guarantee not losing money on. The players have to take it or strike.
Well, no, they can enforce a 50-game schedule at this point in time, which is likely what's going to happen. But if that does happen, and irrespective if it does, as Russ and I were tweeting earlier, you think this is bad? Just wait to the next CBA. And you may get a strike before that. This is going to make 94, 95 look like a walk in the park. It's going to make 72 look like a walk in the park.
Actually, absolutely. They already said that this new proposal was met with screams from the other side in anger. I think they're going to strike all the way through. I think if they force it on them, that'll be the worst thing they can do.
All right, let's get started here while we wait for Jan to come. Oh, there you go.
Sorry.
No. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Monday, June 8th, 2020.
I'm Jan Levine.
I'm Russ Cohen from Sportsology.
And I'm Michael Lagello. And this is the Hockey Buzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com.
Well, your tip of the hat is not going to be able to get a haircut. So he's, as opposed to wearing a hat of a hockey thing where he could wear also, he's going to wear the Yankees hat for the two Met fans here, so he can just,
I have to maintain
the tip of the cap, Derek.
I have to maintain my hockey objectivity there, Jan.
Oh, yeah, right. That'll be a first.
This is the Hockey Buzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. Wow, that's right. All right, let's start with this. Today officially is the first day of Phase 2. That has not meant that all of a sudden tons of players are going to their nearest practice facility. Apparently, I've seen a number of reports about like Calgary not going on the ice until Tuesday or Wednesday. Edmonton, the same thing. Other teams, Montreal only having 2 players in the Montreal area. Toronto seems to be the exception. Most of the players stayed in the Toronto area. The report from Pierre LeBrun over the weekend was that 20 Leafs are in the Toronto area, amongst other players from other teams. So I don't know what they're going to do in terms of ice, whether they're renting their own ice. But I don't know if that's going to be an advantage for the Leafs, because this is not a coachable practice type of situation. This is just getting on the ice, shooting around, getting your blood flowing type of thing. First, Russ, for you first. This right now is going to last until the middle of July. And really, it's like what mostly can be accomplished by simply getting on the ice and skating around.
I don't think it's going to last that long. I think teams are doing it this week. They're going to start doing whatever testing they're going to do. They're going to start seeing how the system works out. I think by the end of the week, early next week, we're going to hear a definite date, because we don't even have a definite date for training camp. I think they will give a definite date. I think they're waiting till the last minute here, too, for Canada, because, again, that 14-day quarantine doesn't get lifted. You're right. Their teams are going to have to practice in the U.S. There's no way around it. Right. And honestly, it does look like it's going to go that way.
Well, I do know that there were, and these are unconfirmed rumors. I haven't heard anything substantial from anyone, but there were some rumors that, like, for example, the Leafs, if both hub cities were in the U.S., that they would practice as long as they could in Toronto, and then practice in Buffalo, where, you know, the practice facilities at the Harbor Center might be available. I don't know if they've taken the ice out. They probably have, because usually at this time of year they already have taken it out. We know that because of the draft combine. But if there are other facilities around here that they would have ice on, that they would do that. But the thing is, they could practice in Toronto and come down, because there's no 14-day going the other way from Canada to the U.S. So maybe that's just a false report. But
yeah, I'm not sure how that part works.
Again, with the borders, it's unclear, right? So right. They haven't been open necessarily yet, right? That's part of the reason why the bit surprising thing is you have not heard any stories of players from overseas coming over, right? The expectation is you most likely will, at least when the announcement was come out at the end of May, the viewpoint was you would have a 14-day quarantine period. That has not necessarily been updated yet at all for players that may come back from overseas. But, you know, presuming, as you guys said, you may have a month, right? So rumors we have thought is maybe July 10th for phase 3. There's also some rumors maybe end of June. And then regardless of when you do it, you're looking at probably a quote-unquote 3-week type of training camp to get players ready to get back into game mode, which would be phase 4, and the kickoff of the play-in round, which you're looking at maybe end of July, early August. All right. So I think that part of this is get players back on the ice, get them in the system itself, start to be able to monitor them to kind of see the level of conditioning that they may be at, use the month to help ramp up that conditioning in a controlled setting, and then really start training camp, especially if depending on where we stand with the virus in terms of globally and in the U.S. and in Canada, and then also the ability to incorporate additional, for lack of a better term, openings in terms of the processes that are going to go on even before phase 3. You may have a scaled approach to get to phase 3 with things opening up as you start going week by week.
Right. Like we don't even know, like as an example, I've heard some flyers are at the skate zone today. We don't know where they're getting their supply of tests from, right? Is it from the league? Are they getting it locally? Like those kinds of things are all things that have to get worked out now in the next few weeks. I am a little surprised, though, that players haven't flown over yet, unless they're just keeping it quiet. Maybe our government asked them to keep it quiet when they came through. That wouldn't shock me.
Well, I did see.
But you're allowed to fly, right? There's nothing precluding
you are allowed to fly
now.
But we're not. But we're not allowed to fly anywhere out of this country right now. We are not, and there's a lot of countries that won't accept us.
Right, but they've been given essential status.
Right,
so there is
but we just may never hear about it until we're all of a sudden practicing. That's my point.
I did see video on the weekend of Henrik Lundqvist skating in Sweden.
Right.
So I mean, it does sound like, you know, for example, I think I mentioned a few times, you know, Austin Matthews and Frederik Andersen are in Arizona right now. They flew there after, you know, things hit in March. They've been there ever since. They have the ability to probably skate at either the Coyotes practice facility or
not clear. Well, that wasn't clear because I think when it came out, it wasn't 100% clear as to whether or not I thought they couldn't necessarily use other facilities. At least when this phase opens, maybe beforehand, people were trying to get private ice time if they possibly could in locations. But I thought the team facilities were only going to be limited to those players on the team itself.
Well,
but again, it all depends also with teams that are out of it. You might be able to have a different view.
It may be the fact that they rented their own ice before this.
Right.
From what I understand, with phase 2, other NHL players from other teams can make avail of ice time with the other teams because everybody else is spread out.
The other thing is, I saw last night there are people playing beer league hockey in Florida. I saw like 2 days ago in Pennsylvania, rinks were getting cleaned out for their recreational things like beer league hockey, like lessons. So I think, I think those places, there's more places open now, Jan, than we realize.
Now, another interesting note, John Shannon, who was on the show.
Who's that, John Shannon? I never heard of him.
Yeah, I know. So we had somebody on the show a few weeks ago.
You can replay the tape, guys. I'm sure we can figure out, just how much he likes both of you also.
Well, he liked me as a guest on Leaf Lunch.
Repeatedly, I hear.
Yeah. every show there, Jan. But John Shannon clarified some of the unknowns of the play-in round and the round robin. One, round robin games are regular season overtime rules, meaning 5-minute overtime and shootout. The play-in round, the 8 teams, they will go with playoff overtime rules, meaning sudden death. The other interesting thing is that the ongoing question of how these stats in these games will be considered. All these stats are considered playoff games. So now this is the thing, Russ. Okay, it's great we have clarification. Maybe this is a compromise that falls in favor of the owners, because if these stats were regular season stats, they would qualify for bonuses.
Right.
And the games played would qualify towards if a player played 40 games, and it would count towards a year toward unrestricted free agency. By them designating these games, these playing games, as playoff games, none of those things come into focus.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, if a player didn't reach his bonus from whatever amount of games they played, they're not going to get it. Like, I think they're going to live with that. I don't think that's the end of the world. Well, luckily the sides aren't fighting over it.
Yeah, what I was saying is I think the players got the important things. Like, they got best of 7. They got other aspects that they wanted. Reseeding. But
based on the awards vote, some will get others too.
Right. So, I think it's a little bit of a compromise. But Jan, I mean, what do you think the playoff games, the stats counting as playoff games? I think that's fair.
In my opinion, honestly, they should have created a separate category, right? This is an aberration of a year, and right, I don't foresee us, hopefully, having this happen again, right? For my purposes, these are to get you to the playoff round. That's the whole purpose of the play-in round. Look, I don't think anybody's ever breaking Wayne Gretzky's record in terms of numbers he put up, right? But you are looking at numbers where if you're going to look at somebody's history, you're going to be skewed based upon potentially the additional games that somebody has played, right? Again, if this starts becoming the norm as opposed to exception, then I would maybe retroactively change it. But for purposes now, I almost think you would create just a separate category and have numbers accordingly, and then start the playoff count when you actually get down to the 16 and go with that number. I agree with it not being regular season, because not every team is playing in it. The bigger question, if you think about it, is how is the NBA going to be treating the 8 games that 22 of the teams, as opposed to all 30 teams, are going to be playing? Is it regular season? Because numbers are really skewed because you don't have everybody playing in those games. That's really going to be more of an aberration than even this. So my view when I first heard of this, I said, okay, view the play-in round as a separate standalone category, and then have everything else hit the playoffs.
Okay. I saw this little note here. It was tweeted it was posted on the Athletic website earlier by Corey Pronman about Tim Stützle, who is ranked by most people, I would say, Russ, top 10 in the upcoming draft?
Possibly higher, but yeah.
Top 3 or 4 maybe in some.
He could be 3 or 4 in some. He could be 5 in others. Definitely top 10, just to say, yes, it's a guarantee.
Right, but the assertion here is that by Pronman is that he's the likely first European to be selected in this draft, and that's a bit of a bold assertion, because you have Lucas Raymond there, you have Holtz there. I mean, it's an opinion, and we don't know what's going to happen until the draft happens in October. But I thought that was going out there a little bit.
I mean, it is going out there a little bit. I don't mind that. But if you're going to tell me he's going second, then I'm going to tell you I don't think so, and I could give you 1,000 reasons why. The one thing I want you to point out, though, is about Mannheim. Look, it's playing against men, so there's something to be said about that. There's a little bit of speed in the league, so that's fine. They don't face a lot of back pressure there. There's not a lot of that at all. And to give you an example, David Wolf, who played 3 games for the Calgary Flames in the NHL, had 19 goals this year. So you do have to sort of look at those numbers and say, all right, but you can see the talent in Stützle, I should say. It's there. But the idea is how are you going to mark that against the SHL? That's the biggest thing, because the SHL to me is a harder league. It's not even close. And that's where I think Corey might be running into a little bit of trouble because, again, let me look up the numbers. But just to give you an example, I have Stutzla 6th. I have, Holtz as the first European off the board. I'll give you his numbers. Let's see. And they were pretty good. And, again, he also played World Juniors. He had 9 goals and 16 points in 35 games for Djurgården. Now, actually, so
this is as a 17-year-old.
As a 17-year-old, Patrick Berglund's on that team. We all remember him, Mike.
Yep.
Yeah, he's a member of the Buffalo Chamber of Commerce, isn't he?
Yeah, and he scored 17 goals for them this year with 31 points. So he had 31 points, and basically the other Holtz had 16. So, I mean, as a 17-year-old, to me, watching them both play, if I'm selecting apples to apples, that's why I have Alexander Holtz higher. But Stutzla right now is the flavor of the month. I really like the kid. I spoke to him. I think he has great potential, but I think you do have to be careful about overrating the league. I think Sider's a great example. Sider was really good in that league, and he was really close to the NHL, really close. Went down to AHL, had a nice year. We're pretty sure he's starting next year in the AHL, so in the NHL, so that's great. But again, he didn't even play right away, and he, to me, looked like pretty much a can't miss to play in the NHL right away, and I said so. So it does show you that, but again, defense is hard, right? So maybe it's because he's a defenseman too.
I just want to touch on this because I saw it in the chat and figure we could talk about this for a few minutes before we get to our preview on the Leafs versus the Blue Jackets. I saw somebody send this in chat a couple days ago. May have even been Davy Jones here, but talk about a Kyle Palmieri trade to Buffalo for their first round pick. Okay, first of all, Buffalo's got a top 7 pick.
Right.
Palmieri is only under contract
one more year.
For one more year.
One more year.
That's a non-starter. A third round pick is not going to make the difference between, trading a top 10 pick and, a good player. Don't get me wrong. I think if Buffalo is trading that first pick, which I think is a possibility based on the fact that Jason Botterill is in a position where he's got to make the playoffs or he loses his job, it's going to be a player who's got term and not 1 year. It's going to be 2 or 3 years at least. And it's somebody young and maybe even somebody either on his entry level or on his second contract. So I mean, Palmieri might give him immediate help, but that's the same type of deal that they made for Jeff Skinner, and they gave up a third round pick in Cliff Pooh. So you're not giving up a top 7 pick for Kyle Palmieri when you give.
No, I mean, unless you got him locked up.
Right.
And again, I still would say it's a little desperate. As much as I like Palmieri, I mean, he's going to get you 25 goals, but I still wouldn't do it because, again, if he signs in Buffalo, you're going to have to sign him to like a 7 or 8 year deal. And at his age, even though he's not old, what's Palmieri?
29. Todd Cordell wrote about it today in terms of what he thinks.
I wouldn't do it.
Now what the next deal is going to look like. But his view is the Devils probably do need to move on. Yeah. Anything more than 3 or 4 years, as you said, based upon his age, when that deal is going to expire.
Well,
they
have tons of cap space, so they might be in a position to overpay if they think he's a positive influence on that young group.
But as you said, if they had a pick towards the mid to early 20s,
sure,
I would say maybe, right? But a top 7, you're not giving it up. And I don't. And Mike, in terms of I don't know who's trading you a player on an entry level deal to get into the top 7, unless they view that guy as vastly inferior to the player they may draft. And then the question becomes, why would Buffalo make that trade also?
Well, and I use this as an example on a prior show, and granted, I think it would have to be a larger deal, but a team like Tampa that doesn't have a ton of cap space and that has a player like Anthony Cirelli coming up for a big payday, even if he takes the bridge deal like Braden Point did. Braden Point got close, I think close to $6 million or over $6 million on a bridge deal. Let's see, 6.75 for 3 years. Cirelli's not as good as Point in terms of points, but he's pretty damn good. And I think you probably get around $5 million on a bridge deal.
Cirelli's a better deal, but let's just get back to Palmieri for a sec. You got to believe either Pegula or somebody else on staff would step in and say, hold on. Because I'm sure Pegula would say, all right, before we make this trade, who do you think we could get if we're picking 7th? And what they're going to say is, well, maybe Raymond's on the board, maybe he's not. Maybe Marco Rossi's on the board, maybe he's not. Anton Lundell will definitely be on the board, and Askarov will be on the board. End of the day, Askarov, Lundell, maybe even Raymond, within 2 years will be in the NHL. So why are you going to sign a guy essentially, even if it's for 3, when you could have any one of these guys for the next 10, fill a hole that you need, and we don't have to argue about the goaltending today, but fill a hole that you may need or definitely need, and have that person for 10 years maybe. It's not going to do anything for them. Like Jan said, it's not going to advance them into the playoffs by making that move.
Well, I mean, I personally think there's no move that they can make within reasonable expectation that gets them in the playoffs. But if Botterill is under orders by Pegula, which I think, maybe not, we don't know. Either you win or you're gone. Then he's got to allow him to make the moves that he thinks are necessary.
No, he doesn't. I mean, again, it's
not if you can adversely impact your franchise moving forward. You don't.
Right.
That's the old thinking, Mike. I know that's how we used to think 10 years ago. Well, he's got to let him do what he wants. Owners don't have to let a GM who could be on his way out obliterate a franchise. They don't, and they shouldn't let him do it anymore because ramifications in a cap league last a lot longer than they did 10 years ago.
Well, and the one thing is the Sabres are not as bad off cap-wise as they were when Botterill took over for Tim Murray.
Talent-wise, they are.
But talent-wise, they are. Now, the other thing regarding New Jersey, Zach posted on his blog this morning about Johnny Gaudreau. It's not, the thing is, I don't think it's really going out on a limb to say, well, Johnny Gaudreau is from the Jersey, Philly area, and we've heard Flyer rumors for a while. Now we're hearing Devils rumors. Again, Gaudreau, I believe, has 2 years left.
2 years is $6.75 million left.
Yeah, and now the question is, and Eck is tying one thing to the other. He thinks that Calgary, and there's a lot of rumor about Calgary going after Taylor Hall because he's from the Calgary area, and there was some expectation that he might have been traded to Calgary had Arizona not stepped up with the package that they did. But if they go after Taylor Hall, then they might trade Gaudreau, and probably to clear the cap space, but also to get young assets back. The question is, what could they get for Gaudreau? And does it make sense for the Devils to go after a guy like Gaudreau who may want to play there, but they're a couple years at least away from being a contender, and by that time he's an unrestricted free agent?
I think part of it's got to depend on what happens with the league this year if they modify anything associated with buyouts, right? So they took on Milan Lucic's salary, right? They're covering because to cover up from another bad deal they made, right? So they have $5.25 million of salary tied up for a guy that honestly is clearly not worth that amount, right? And the whole viewpoint I think that we had is if you're adding Hall, you got to jettison salary. You're jettisoning Gaudreau's salary. Well, if you're jettisoning somebody, and it depends on if ownership's willing, just buy out Lucic. Get him off your books if you have to. Take a little bit of the cap hit, and there where you free up salary, you don't have to necessarily move Johnny Gaudreau, who did not have a great year last year by comparison, but still, they're a much better team with Gaudreau and Hall on that team than adding a younger guy just to get rid of Gaudreau because you're freeing up salary to sign Hall, and you don't know whether or not Hall's going to be any better there either.
No, the one thing I'll say is we're not hearing any talk about a buyout or anything, so I'm not anticipating any of that going on, Jan. So I think what it is what it is. I don't think the league's going to help anybody right now because too many things are up in the air, and I think they're just going to leave it the way it is. With someone like Gaudreau, look, it's easy to say, oh, yeah, you should buy him out and get the trade and whatever, but he is still too valuable. You're right. And I think at the end of the day, it's a skating league, and the guy can skate. If you put him with the right guys, he's still going to get 60 to 80 points depending on how the year goes. Everybody has an off year. You go look at your favorite player in the NHL, and they had an off year. Alex Ovechkin's had an off year. Doesn't mean he's going to get traded.
Yeah, and the buyout of Lucic, if it's not a compliance buyout but a regular buyout, he's making 5.25 the next 3 years. But the money goes down. It was a front-loaded contract. But if you buy him out, the 2/3 amount would be about $2 million a year for spread out over. Let's see. Oh, actually, sorry, a million a year for 6 years. So you might be able to get away with it, but I think you're looking to clear more than $4 million if you're going to sign Taylor Hall. You're probably looking to clear $6 or $7 million, and that's what Goudreau is making. So unless you can arrange some other deal, I mean, right now they're going to lose Brody probably, unless he resigns. They're going to lose Hamonic in free agency. If they don't sign either one of those guys and go with a lot of young defensemen, maybe they can do it that way and keep Goudreau. But I think it could be, if Taylor Hall comes in, then Goudreau goes out. It's just a question that they probably can't take a lot of salary back. And I don't know what New Jersey would be willing to give up in a deal for Goudreau. They're not giving up first-round picks. Would they give up a Damon Severson or somebody of that nature? I don't know.
I think they might. But I think that trade has to get made after a draft, because if they were to get Drysdale, then they would give up Severson, right? Because then they also have Ty Smith coming, and they figure, all right, now we're going to have a bunch of young defensemen. We can live with that. We can move a Damon Severson, who is a talented guy. So, but ahead of time, I don't think they can do it, because if you go look at their organizational depth, they're still going to need defense. This is still a defensive league. They can't just throw guys like that around anymore.
Yeah.
Yes, but in my opinion, not worth a Johnny Goudreau.
No, it would be more than that.
Although, as we've seen, you do get one-for-one trades that don't make sense with defensemen and forwards. So
yeah, but it would be more than that.
One note from Pierre LeBrun before we start the Leaf Blue Jacket preview. LeBrun reports there's been some confusion out there about potential start of NHL training camps for the 24 teams in Phase 3. Both the NHL and the PA, subject to negotiation, are hoping for mid-July still for start of camps. So they said July 10th was the earliest. From everything I've heard, 3 weeks is going to be too long for these camps, especially if these players.
That's why I think they're going to give it this week, so players say, things are coming along. This is how it's going. They're going to have to give a real date at some point, and I don't think they're going to give a date in 2 weeks saying it's July 10th, because you're right. At that point, players might get bored.
Right. I think they're going to get bored in a week because they really can't do anything.
Right.
But, okay. All right. So we talked about Montreal, Pittsburgh. We talked about Rangers and Carolina. We've reviewed the Sabres and the Red Wings in terms of the non-playoff teams. Today we'll cover the third of the 4 Eastern Conference play-in rounds, and that's one that I'll be watching every minute of, which is the Columbus Blue Jackets and the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, on the surface, both of these teams, they had 81 points. Columbus was in the second wild card in the East. Leafs were in third in the Atlantic. That doesn't mean anything anymore because of points percentage. They were 8-9 in the Eastern Conference. To me, of the first round matchups in the East, I think it's the toughest one to predict, simply because Tortorella did a fantastic job with a extremely injured club, an extremely shorthanded club based on a number of unrestricted free agents leaving Columbus. He kept that team together even when he lost his number one goaltender in Jonas Carpasalo, and Elvis came in and played fantastic. I think it was February when he went like 8-0-1 or something like that. So I think that the Leafs are a more talented team. We'll just do an overview to start, but it's a question of the Leafs were, when they were good, they were unbelievable, and when they were bad, they sucked. And that you don't know what team is going to show up. Is it the team that was unspectacular under Mike Babcock that forced him to get fired? Was it the team in January and February that struggled under Sheldon Keefe, had injuries, and then like in March, just before the shutdown, started to play a little better, but they had injuries as well? We don't know, and we're going to see that in next month or later in early August possibly. But Russ, you first, just an overview of what you expect from this series.
What I expect from the series is I expect Columbus to try and suffocate the Leafs offense. Even though Columbus has all their players back, it doesn't matter. Torts is still the coach. They were second in the league, tied for second in the league in fewest goals allowed. That is going to be the name of the game. Keep the puck out of our net. He doesn't even care. I don't think he'll care if it goes to 5 overtimes every game. He'll be happy if it's 0-0 after 3. He really would. He would think that's a win. So I think that's the motive. I think that helps their goaltending if they do that, which is the one thing we're going to say is right now a little up in the air, even though it's probably going to be okay. That's going to be the obstacle for the Leafs to overcome. Will they be able to break through that defensive wall? That's my big overview.
Jan?
I agree with Russ in terms of it. So a couple things I look for. One, who does Torts turn to between the pipes? Does he go back to Korpisalo, or with Merzlikins fully healthy now, does he play Merzlikins between the pipes? That's kind of one thing to look at. B, what do we get for Columbus? What do we get out of Cam Atkinson? Atkinson had an injury-prone season. Even when he was healthy, his numbers were substantially down. If Atkinson can be the guy he was a couple of years ago, Columbus becomes infinitely much more dangerous to play because of the production that we've seen out of them. For Toronto, to be really honest, Mike, my question to you is how tight are they gripping the sticks? There's an enormous amount of pressure on this team, right? Their coach got fired because they underachieved. They haven't really produced yet in the playoffs. They've been talked about as the potential champion in the future, a team that seems to have an enormous amount of talent offensively, yet there's still questions about their blue line. And even with Frederick Anderson between the pipes, lose game 1, and that pressure gets ratcheted up tremendously. How good is the leadership in that room to be able to calm things down and get them back on track if they lose game 1?
I think the leadership in the room is good. Guys like Tavares, Muzzin, and Spezza, who came in as a veteran guy, are very helpful. But I think the matchup is bad. Like Russ was saying, if Columbus tries to play that shutdown game, which we know Torts loves, that is something that the Leafs have struggled against. You see the struggles against Boston. Boston plays that type of game, but Boston has a lot more talent. And the thing is, the Leafs did go to 7 games with Boston in the playoffs last year. Can Columbus even completely healthy? And the only guy that's going to probably not make it back is Josh Anderson.
And Dubinsky, right? I don't think Dubinsky.
Yeah, and probably Dubinsky too. But everybody else, Ryan Murray, the Werenski and Jones will all be back. Cam Atkinson will be back. So all their forwards will be back. But whether they have enough offensive firepower to even win a 2-1 or 3-2 game. But the thing is, that's counterbalanced by Toronto's inability to keep the puck out of their net at times. Columbus doesn't have tons of great scoring, but the Leafs defensively can give them opportunities that if they take advantage of them, then that is sort of counterbalanced. So
yeah, I think they're going to start with Elvis. I think they're going to keep Korpisalo as the backup since he's mostly used to that anyhow. And as a veteran, would make sense to keep him as that. I do. You could say that, Mike, but he's the more dynamic goalie, and I think
he is. But the one thing I noticed was when he came back, because he came back at the end of February after Elvis had that fantastic February where he won like 8 of 9 games. Korpisalo was given the number 1 job back, and Elvis went 0-2-2, I think, in his last 4 games. So it seemed like Korpisalo he reascended to that number 1.
It could be. I mean, I can't tell you. It's Torts and goalies. But the other things is, look, the Leafs power play is great. Columbus's was garbage. Columbus's will probably get better based on the guys that came back. I think it hit the skids when they lost their major players, including Seth Jones. So I think that'll come up a little. The Leafs maybe will go down a little because they might struggle in the playoffs a little on the power play. Yeah. I think that's the key thing is, if you're Columbus, you've got to keep the Leafs off the power play. And Torts is pretty good at that. Like if he gets everybody to buy in, again, you named me, they've got Murray, they've got Werenski, and they've got Seth Jones on defense. That's enough. That's all the defense Torts needs. He can build the rest around those guys.
Yeah, and David Savard, who he's playing.
Right, but you know what I mean. Those are the
he's got a dynamic top 3. And Jan, I started to do a position-by-position breakdown in my blogs on the series. And goaltending, I gave the Leafs a slight advantage because we were just talking about who's going to be the starter for Columbus and how soon if they lose the first game would Torts pull and go the other way. But the concern for Toronto is we know Anderson's a slow starter, and after 3 months off, this is basically like the start of a season. So is he going to be the Anderson of November and December where he was the best goalie or one of the best goalies in the league? Or is it going to be like October where he has struggled 3 of his 4 years in Toronto? We don't know that. That's why I think the advantage isn't greater, because Anderson, I think overall is a good goaltender, but he at times is a liability because he's just inconsistent depending on wear and tear and the time of the year.
Which is why the couple of weeks of training camp is really going to be important. You would expect to see guys ramping up conditioning, but I would think the last week and a half, you're going to start seeing scrimmages, right? You're going to want to get guys somewhat back to game action, especially those going into the plan, right? So those teams that are in the round in the 1 through 4 slots, they're getting a couple of games to kind of lead their way into the playoffs. The teams that are 5 through 12 and are fighting to make the playoffs, you can't, as you said, get off to a slow start. You need to be ready right from the initial puck drop, which means you need to be game ready. So those type of scrimmages in terms of, fast pace, requiring goalies to play at the top of their game, seeing what you have between the pipes, that's going to be huge for teams like Toronto, especially as you said. Anderson's going to have to use that time as viewing it as, hey, here's my prep time to get ready for the playoffs. I can't go, pardon my language, half-assed. I really have to go full speed in these and be ready for when the puck drops for game 1 of the playing round.
Now, a couple other notes, Mike. So I give the Leafs the edge at center. I do think that's a big edge for them. I do give the Blue Jackets the edge in being physical because the Leafs were like 29th in the league in hits.
Right.
And again, what Jan just explained, that you put that in John Tortorella's favor rather than Sheldon Keefe. It's no slight to Keefe, but Torts has been there before,
sure.
and Keefe hasn't. And so Torts could rally his troops and get them all on the same page a lot quicker than probably almost any coach in the league because he's very good at that.
Yeah, I mean, I think he outcoached John Cooper last year. So yeah, it's not above out of the realm of possibility that he outcoaches a rookie NHL coach, even though I think Sheldon Keefe is a really good coach. The thing is I think Toronto has a great advantage at forward, but Columbus has just as great an advantage on the blue line, and it could come down to who's more effective on special teams. It could come down to those intangibles that we always talk about. I mean, there's a guy like Kyle Clifford who was brought in a trade from LA in February. That sort of rough and tumble style that he plays make up for the fact that most of the Leaf players don't want to get involved physically. I mean, you've got Boone Jenner, you've got Savard, you've got Cam Atkinson, who's sort of a feisty guy.
They're still going to struggle for goals. We know that.
Right. I mean, I think Pierre-Luc Dubois matches up against one of Tavares or Matthews, but who matches up against the other? And that's always unless you're Boston and you've got Krejci and you've got Bergeron to match up against 2 top centers, there are not many teams that can handle basically 2 number 1 centers like Crosby and Malkin or Tavares and Matthews. And that's where that advantage has to really take place for Toronto to win a series. Now, I think this is a 5-game series, which is always a cop-out when it's a 7-game series and you say 7 because anybody could really win. I think on paper, Toronto should win.
Just give us who's going to win, Mike. We don't want to hear on paper.
I think Columbus is going to win in 5.
Okay. I think the Leafs will win in 5. I wouldn't be shocked if it's 5 and that last game goes to overtime, double overtime, triple overtime.
Gee, talk about writing on paper a script there. Thanks there, Russ.
I know, but I do think Torts is going to make this series a war of attrition, but I think the Leafs will just have too much goal scoring in the end, even getting some of it shut down. So I'm going to go with the Leafs.
So my view on this is I think Columbus's offense is going to be better than anticipated, as you said, based upon getting everybody back. You look at what Pierre-Luc Dubois did this year. You look at what Bjorkström did when he was healthy this year. Alexander Tessier is a nice little wild card that they get back who is hurt. I think the Maple Leafs depth get hurt a little bit because Andreas Jansson's out, right? You got Mikheyev back, but you're going to have Johnson out. The key is going to be does Torts end up putting Jones and Werenski together at times, or he keeps them split to try to maximize the impact of the two of them? I'm gonna also go 5. I'm gonna give Toronto a hair of an advantage, but I wouldn't be, if Columbus wins this series at all. Wouldn't shock me in the slightest.
No, I don't think anybody would be shocked.
And to answer your question before, I don't think the Leafs are grabbing the stick too tight right now. I think
if they lose game 1, then the doubts start to creep in a little bit.
I think the doubts start to creep in if they lose this series. I think they're going in it confident, and maybe even if they fall down a game, they internally they have the confidence that they can win the series. But as an observer watching that team all year, I have no confidence in their ability to play two-way hockey, and it's only been off and on that they've been able to do it. When they play it, they're pretty good. They went into Tampa and won. I think it was 2-1 late in the season. They went in for the most important game of the regular season and beat Florida. They can do it. It's just I think they sometimes just get lazy and they decide they want to play fast and loose. And you cannot win playoff hockey playing fast and loose. If they play disciplined hockey, they can win this series. But
yeah, I think they do have more pressure on them than Columbus. We all acknowledge that. And that's just because of the market they're in, and they're not being successful the last few years. But I think they're going to get over the hump here. I don't think they're going to go all the way, but I do think they do have too much in the center spot to lose. And I think at the end of the day, that's where Columbus is really weak. And that's where I think it's really going to cost them, because matchups eventually are going to matter. They're going to.
Yeah. All right, some questions before we end the show.
You say yep, but you went against the Leafs, so
No, I explained why. I don't right now. I don't have the confidence that they can play playoff hockey for 5 games. I don't know whether they can do it.
All right. So knowing that you bet against the Leafs, that means you're not going to wear your Bab socks, right?
They're gone. I threw them.
What did you do with them?
They were burned in the fire pit when he got fired. Okay, some questions here.
That tells us all we need to know.
I was drinking my pineapple tang and toasting to.
Yeah. I didn't know that. We've learned something here. Go ahead.
Yes. Breaking news: Mike burned his Bab socks. Okay. By the way, they're not even called Bab socks anymore. Once he got fired, they changed it to.
They did. I actually bought a couple. I have a Gretzky and a couple others I bought from them.
Yeah, I don't. What is it? Hockey socks?
Hockey socks, I think it is.
Yeah. Okay. Which is good. I know the guys, they've advertised with me. They're a good product, but you can't base it all on a guy who got fired.
They burn real well.
Torch nicely.
They're a good substitute for Duraflame log. Okay, Davey Jones in the chat asked, Russ, if the Sabres do keep their pick and draft 7th, who should they target? Now, I'm looking at your latest draft list, 31 on Sportsology, and you had Lucas Raymond 7th.
Mm-hmm. I think Lucas, if he falls to them, it would be terrific. Can he fall to them? Yeah, I think there's a good chance. I mean, especially if Askarov. I think if the Red Wings pick 4th, if they get screwed out of all those picks, I think they're going to go with Askarov because they don't have a franchise goalie, and I know that Yzerman would like a franchise goalie. We've heard Kevin Allen say it. If that happens, somebody's getting pushed down, and then I think it becomes up to Lucas Raymond, Anton Lundell. Now, Lundell would solve a center problem for them. I don't think he'll ever be more than a second-line center. But again, they do need a second-line center for Jack Eichel in the future, so Lundell would be another one that would be very tempting.
Okay. Now, if it came down between Askarov somehow being there and a forward of a similar ilk, are they going for the goalie?
I think they should. I know everybody in Buffalo, the media will tell me they won't. Absolutely not. They have a goalie. They have Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, and he's a guarantee. But as for what we know of goalies, there are no guarantees. And again, I give the argument that even if you're going to tell me Ullmark could possibly be a number 1 or be a number 2, who's to say by the time Askarov is there in 2 or 3 years that's going to be the case? So I would take the goalie.
Yeah, I find it
only because I think he's the number 1 guaranteed franchise goalie. It's the only reason I'm saying this.
Yeah, I just don't know whether, because they've taken Middlestat 2 years or 3 years ago, Dahlin obviously with the number 1 pick. They've taken 2 centers in the last 3 years in Middlestat and Cousins. Whether they're going to go down the road of taking another center like a Marco Rossi or I don't think Perfetti's going to get to 7. So
no, he won't be there.
Yeah. All right. One last question here from Anthony in the chat. Will Tort's playoff signature mannerisms be elevated or lessened with the Toronto press pressure? The Toronto press loves Torts because it's interesting. So I think he might be more effusive. He might be more over the top a little bit, but I don't think it's going to distract the Leafs. I think it's just going to be good fodder for the coverage on Sportsnet and Hockey Night in Canada. So I don't think it's going to affect things one way or the other.
I agree. I'm looking to see in recent memory like the highest drafted goalie from the Buffalo Sabres, and they've not done a good job of drafting goalies. Let's start with that.
Barrasso in '83, he was 5th overall.
Yeah, we have to admit, if you look back at the history of goalies for them that they've drafted, it's not great.
No, so I mean, they drafted Sauvé, they drafted Edwards, they drafted Barrasso, they drafted Darren Pupa as a late pick, but they got Hasek in a deal with Chicago. Ryan Miller was a low round draft pick. So I mean, they've drafted their record in terms of drafting goalies is a lot better than Toronto.
It's better than Toronto, but I'm saying it's not great.
No, it's not great. It's not great, but I mean,
I
think Barrasso should be a Hall of Famer. He probably never will be.
No, I don't disagree with that.
Let's see, one more question if I can find one here.
But Toronto does love Torts. I could echo that.
Yeah. Let's see. Davey's getting a lot of questions. Does it make sense for both teams, meaning Anaheim and Buffalo, if Buffalo traded Montour back to the Ducks for Henry? I don't think Anaheim traded Montour to Buffalo for a reason. They didn't want to pay him.
Right, and I also think Henrique is an older player. Why am I trading a younger defenseman for an older player?
Well, because he's a center. He'd be a number.
He's an older player.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I'm going to hope that I could turn Montour around because he's younger than trade for an aging center who, again, in 3 years, 2 years, 3 years, I'm worried about not being good. I got to stay young if I'm Buffalo. I cannot start adding 28, 29, 30-year-old players.
And if you look at Anaheim right now, okay, they have Getzlaf for one more year, then he probably retires.
Right.
Henrique is their number 2. He's not exactly a number 1 center, but he will be a de facto number 1 center for them when Getzlaf retires. They have Sam Steele as a developing player. Maybe Raquel can play center. But I'm drawing a blank, Russ. Who's their big prospect that they drafted recently? Who's a big?
The center, Trevor Zegras.
Zegras. Okay, Zegras is probably moving.
Zegras is the next Getzlaf for them.
Yeah. So I don't right now think that they'd be willing to trade Henrique because you've got 2 young guys there.
Right.
Maybe if Zegras plays this upcoming year, and they think that he's good enough and ready enough to play in the NHL.
And I do think Max Jones will kick in some offense too for them.
Yeah, but the Montour thing is a non-starter with them. They traded him because they didn't want to pay him, and now the Sabres, he's an RFA with arbitration eligibility. There's a possibility the Sabres would trade him, but I don't think it's going to be back to Anaheim. It's going to be some team that needs a right-handed defenseman under control for a couple of years. Maybe a team that was content with taking him to unrestricted free agency and just seeing what they can get out of him for 2 years.
The other factor for Anaheim is they do need to keep some names on their team to keep it viable in the market for fans to want to go see hockey. And at least if you're a casual hockey fan, Henrique is still a name.
Yeah. All right. We'll be back tomorrow with another edition of the Hockey Buzzcast. We'll be reviewing one of the 7 non-playoff teams. Not sure which one. We'll let you know when we tweet out the show. For the departed Jan Levine, for Russ Cohen, I'm Michael Lagello. Thank you for watching. And remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey.